Beautiful. So chances are very good that you won't remember this sermon by dinner time tonight. Certainly not dinner time in 3 weeks, and definitely not in 3 years. That's a good thing. That really is a good thing. You got to put this act of preaching or even public speaking in its proper place sometimes, which is to say that the overwhelming majority of speeches and sermons, especially farewell speeches and sermons, are not especially memorable. If things are ending well, or relatively well, farewell speeches are memorable for reasons based on tragedy or felony. I swear I didn't steal that $1 billion. I've been framed. That's a memorable farewell speech. I was once talking to a member of this congregation about the act and art of preaching, noting what a tiny fraction of the words that are said are words that are remembered. Even the very afternoon they're said. The vast majority are gone for good, of course. I half in jest asked this particular member if there was anything that I had said after having listened to dozens of my sermons. Was there anything that they remembered? The reply was a lengthy pause, followed by, I remembered you used the expression, a shovel full of shit once. I remember that. Now, there are several lessons you might draw from this anecdote, that after several thousand hours of preparation and delivery, people might recall general themes about what we say, or a feeling that was generated, or a style that was offered, that it takes an unusual turn of phrase for it to be recalled later. Or perhaps the lesson is just this: I should have sworn more while I was here. So probably none of what I say today will last long in the memory except my own, because I'm not going to swear again, I think, and I didn't steal $1 billion. But from my perspective, there's really 2 sermons that I won't forget easily, and in some ways, they help summarize and bookend my time with you. In 2015, September 2015, I said to all of you, we have to do something. And in 2021, I talked about the Torrey Canyon. Before I get to the bookends, though, I just want to make quick mention of some of the stuff in the middle. I came in 2015, which was a different era in some ways. A different era. You could argue that there were all sorts of turning points in the last 7 years. In some quarters, you won't forget that presidential election in 2016. It was a bit unusual. I remember Stewardship Sunday in 2016, the Sunday after the election, talking to you all about stewardship and the church, and some of you looking at me like, you think that's on my mind right now? Oh my gosh, do you see what's happening out there? Never would I have imagined that the most widely shared meme of 2017 was a tweet from the President of the United States saying, despite the constant negative press, covfefe. That was the most popular meme in 2017, followed by the Press Secretary of the United States telling the world that tweet was intentional. It was meant to mean something to a small group of people who understood the tweet. It was a particular kind of Gnosticism that we were living through, a new era, a different era. It wasn't just related to the president, of course. Misinformation, social media, the way in which we absorbed information, the way in which we got locked into echo chambers. Spring of 18, we took a bus of 50 or more to Washington for the March for Our Lives, organized by Betsy Richardson, a proud moment that is sometimes overshadowed by the trajectory of the nation and its relationship to firearms, of course. 2019, there was an impeachment. Quid pro quo was the phrase of the year. Brexit jolted Europe, and the surge at our southern border really grew in earnest as people came north from Central America, but then were joined by refugees from all over the world. We began to hear of MPP and Remain in Mexico and safe third country agreements. Some folks went south to serve, a handful more than once. And the Christmas offering in 2019 was for asylum seekers in Matamoros. And of course, that experience had a profound impact on me. Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek." I have no idea what to do with that particular beatitude. I sure felt meek in South Texas. The meekness, the almost pathetic nature of wheeling rickety pull carts of food across a heavily militarized bridge, suspended between two countries, who act as if it's the most consequential thing in the world to guard that place. The river, the Rio that isn't that grand there, meanders underneath without a care in the world, not a drop of it containing any moral agency or thoughts on policy or even knowing that two countries are on either side of it. It just flows. You get to the other side of this militarized space, a Mexican Marine stands sentry with a bulletproof vest and combat boots and an M16, looking really tough. You know the sweat must be pouring off the guy, but he stands sentry, rigid, unmoving. It's a little pathetic then to be the guy who wanders past that Marine, trundling a little pull cart of food, the wheels rattling and shaking on rutted concrete, past the heaviness, the tension, this powder keg. Some people spend their lives telling others where to sit, when they get to eat, where they'll sleep, how they'll bathe, when they can come, when they can go. And others endure that treatment, fleeing violence and aching poverty, not of their own making, not of their own doing at all. A poverty that is actually the fault of some people, not always those who endure it. It is the fault of Jimmy Morales and Alejandro Giammattei and Perez Molina and Juan Hernandez and Salvador Sanchez Cerén and all the other presidents of Honduras and Guatemala in the last couple of generations that have been crooked as a dog's leg. It's also the fault of American politicians who drew up CAFTA, promising jobs and prosperity. So many jobs, they'll be coming out of your nostrils, they said. And there's fewer factory jobs in Guatemala now than the day CAFTA was signed in 2005. It's the fault of United Fruits and Eisenhower and Dulles. It's the fault of the patrons from Europe. It's the fault of anyone and everyone who went to Central America looking to extract what they could from the land and the people and then get out of there. It's the fault of North Americans who don't have the guts or the imagination to institute a Marshall Plan for the Northern Triangle with a generational targeted investment because it's easier to resort to myopia and jingoism and scapegoating poor brown people. Yeah, it's the saddest and most pathetic thing to then, in response to all that, trundle a pull cart of cut up watermelon. I'd never been more engaged, though, more animated, more inflamed. That trip changed my life, changed everything for me. I wrote a novel over the last year and a half, out in a couple or 3 months. It's partially set in Brownsville. MPP hangs onto that story like an itchy sweater, which was a catharsis for me in writing it all out because I've never shaken Texas, and that trip helped me to connect a number of dots. However, the stirrings, the pull of caring about and for people on the run from violence and systemic poverty goes back much further, of course. I go to the bookends now. I never was really able to move on from Alan Kurdi. Remember that name? Alan Kurdi, that poor little toddler who drowned in the Mediterranean in 2015 and washed up on a beach. That picture was shown all around the world, and it shook so many of us to our cores. The first bookend from when I started here at Union, I'd only been here 6 weeks or so when the world saw that picture for the first time. No idea what else I said early September 2015, but I remember the rush of blood. It wasn't in my notes, or the movement of the Spirit, but it definitely wasn't in my notes. In light of that terrible, awful, moving picture, I went to this microphone right here, and I said, by God, we have to do something. And many union members said, we know. That's right. We get it. 3,600 people died in the Mediterranean that year, most of them fleeing the war in Syria. And in light of that awful tragedy, you all responded, a dozen or more people, not long after I said what I said from here, huddled in the Jersey City office of Church World Service, where we learned about doing what we could to help just one family. Of course, all of you have helped more than just one family. In different ways and at different times, we have helped people from Syria, Afghanistan, Honduras, Somalia, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, through ESL, apartments, social service aids, job hunting, clothes, food, rides, advice, support, and much more. And I know that that kind of aid and support preceded my time here and goes back decades at Union, and I trust it will continue into the future. And the future brings me to the other bookend, the other sermon that probably stands out, at least for me, but a few of you have also said that the sermon about plan continuation bias. How's that for a theological term? Plan continuation bias. The Torrey Canyon sermon. Some of you have told me that that sermon stood out for you, especially because it was not always a sermon that was particularly appreciated. The Torrey Canyon was a tanker that sank off the coast of England, which itself is terrible, but it was a preventable tragedy. Everyone could see that the route the ship was taking was foolish, except those on board. They got locked into a plan and they kept going with it. There's always a prejudice that we have, the values, the work we've already done, the time and effort we've plowed into projects, so we just keep going. The Torrey Canyon was different because it had time and opportunity and resources, intelligence and experience to make different decisions. They weren't kids going to sea for the very first time. Stated much more positively, we confronted the challenges that are ahead for churches in the future by sharing and strategizing, dreaming and dreaming some more. I know I won't see the end of this road. I won't see all the fruits of the labor, but I trust and know that there will be a lot of good fruit. I trust that because of the good people among the members, the wisdom of the staff, and the yearning here to make meaning and do good. Those are the sermon bookends, I suppose, for me. 2015, I got a rush of blood and said, let's do something about this terrible tragedy, and you all said, okay. And towards the end of my time here, said, let's do something about the direction of the church so we can help people in the future, and we agreed to take some steps toward giving it a shot. In between the bookends, there were news cycles and elections and the outbreak of a pandemic and Easter sunrises and candlelit Christmas Eves, weddings, memorials, baptisms, and new members joining through affirmation of baptism and jokes and stories, and at least one occasion, a magic trick on the chancel steps. I found the absorbing powder that I used to make water disappear about 5 years ago in the back of my closet the other day. Perhaps you guys might remember that trick. We shared a lot of laughs. During my time here, there have been a handful of meetings, here and there. Some people moved in, some people moved out. Last sermons, final speeches, goodwells, and farewells, not usually very memorable. It's too late to plant seeds or really inspire or drop new wisdom. It's too late now to make this one particularly impactful or memorable. You'll not remember this one. Probably not by dinner time, almost certainly not in 3 weeks, and definitely not in 3 years. And that's okay. You might remember a shovel full of blank. You might remember the Torrey Canyon. A few of you will recall Gino Bartali. There's a handful of people here for whom Nobuo Fujita rings a bell. You might recall the implorations about Texas and Matamoros, or you might not remember a single thing I ever said, and that's okay too. It's perfectly fine. Because what I take from today, and what I hope you do too, is that for 7 years our lives intersected, and I hope you know that whether I was in the pulpit or in the office or on the lawn or in Texas or Patterson or anywhere else, I took enormous pleasure from being your pastor. It was a joy. I'm fortunate because I'm glad for the past and I'm glad for the future. I'm glad for the past because I was supported and cared for here. And I hope in some small measure at least, you felt that joy. You felt that what we did or said or prayed about really mattered. Because we did good things together. I don't know when I'm going to preach in a church again. And so I want that to be my last word in a sermon to a congregation, or at least this congregation. I'm grateful to all of you for the care and support and love that you've shown. I am grateful to my core. Grateful because we did some good things together. That's it. That's the last word. We did some good things together.